Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. Hey everyone! This week, my friend Rob and I talk about community within the church. Community is a bit of a buzzword. It sometimes feels like one of those words that has been used so much we don't necessarily think about what it means or what we mean when we use it. Maybe you hear the word community and you feel all warm and fuzzy. Maybe you hear it and it gives you hives or makes you roll your eyes because you've experienced it as just one more thing you're obliged to do. If you're in a season of feeling discouraged or disillusioned in community, I hope this conversation will resonate with you. Rob and I are going to talk through some good and less positive experiences in church community, fitting in and exclusivity. Here's a little bit about Rob. Rob was raised in both New England and New York, yet somehow pronounces R's and only argues about sports as much as a normal, healthy person. He's lived in New York for several years now and works in financial services, but his real passion is eating at the best restaurants in the city that only have a single dollar sign in their Yelp ratings. He can usually be found complaining about how much he dreads running and running in Central Park. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Rob. Hey, Rob. Welcome.
Hey, what's up?
Thanks for being here.
Glad to do it.
On this Monday evening in Manhattan. So growing up in Connecticut suburb area, bouncing around Connecticut, can you tell me about a positive experience that you had in community in general? I mean, you can talk about a specific type of community, but...
I would say I had a great youth group experience growing up, and we had pretty good youth leaders there. A lot of them I still talk to every couple of weeks maybe, which for me is pretty frequent. I would say one of our youth group leaders, he's a pastor now somewhere in Virginia. We still exchange a lot of emails and talk about like what's going on in our lives, and I'm not very open with a lot of people I deal with day to day, but with like this dude, he's a guy I trust. We have a lot of like shared background, common interests. So it's just very easy to be open with them and tell them like what's going well with me and things I'm struggling with and just, life updates.
Yeah, that's really cool that you have that connection still with a youth pastor. You have someone that you are still connected with, that you're still close with, that you have that the time put in with that relationship, because I think that's such a hard thing to come by in New York because people just move all the time. You're part of a community group here in New York. Has that been hard for you as far as like cultivating a community here, cultivating those types of friendships?
Yes and no. I think a lot of the people I've met with the community group experiences, they have, because we're on the Upper East Side, worked for one of the hospitals, and they're usually only here for like 2 or 3 years, and then they go off to whatever their next rotation is. I've always kept in touch with them, and then the couple of people who have stayed in the city for the long run, I definitely keep in touch with them, and I've been in 2 community groups now. One of them had to dissolve just because everyone moved away.
Right.
And I currently lead one that I think we started meeting a couple months ago, and it's been a great experience. Everyone there is just absolutely awesome. I love hanging out with them every Tuesday. I think we got very comfortable with each other very quickly. Everyone, was just very mature, very trusting. I think that's a key one there, and we have just enjoyed, sharing with each other and talking about, what we thought about the sermon or what's just going on in our lives and what sort of like prayers we need. Yeah,
that's really cool. I had a similar experience with my first community group, especially where everyone just seemed to buy in, and everyone wasn't interested in having like super, I don't know, like Jesus-y conversations, right. If like we talked about, Jesus and the Bible and all of that stuff, but not in a very like Christianese kind of rehearsed right answer kind of way, which was a really cool experience for me coming in. Would you say that You mentioned a couple different types of relationships in the context of church. Is that where you've generally found a lot of close friends?
Most of the small groups I've been in, whether we've called them small groups or community groups or life groups.
Right. They have all sorts of trendy names that they go by.
Yeah, but they all end up being the same thing, which is like
they are.
a way to get connected outside of that massive 1,000 person large auditorium.
Right.
One of the men's groups I had in a church when I was living in Virginia, I don't think I would have had the experience in my mid-20s I had it not been for that group. That was just a group where we could just, be guys and just talk about the things that we struggled with, the things that, we wanted to celebrate. And it just was a very unique thing every week to have that one experience of a few hours where you're surrounded by guys that you trust and that and that you get along with, that you can be honest with, and just guys that are pretty cool too. I just thought individually each of them were pretty cool people, and I would have been friends with any one of them individually, but it just so happened that we got together in a group, and it was just a very encouraging couple of hours every week. And I've always had jobs that I've probably have taken more seriously than I needed to. I'm just a type A person, so
yeah,
it's always good to have that.
Which is very New York. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool that you've been able to cultivate that pretty much wherever you've been, it sounds like. But maybe could we shift gears a little and you tell me about a time you felt unsuitable in a community context?
Yeah, so I think this was right after college, and I graduated around the time of the mid to late 2000s. I forget what year even. That's how long ago it was.
Distant memory.
Yeah, my reunions were a long time ago, and I did not go to any of them. But it was during the Great Recession, and I had a business degree, so a lot of us just weren't finding jobs. Eventually I found one, but even then the start date was really delayed. I think I had to wait a year and a half before I started.
Wow.
And I knew that, so in the meantime I just took a couple of odd jobs, temps around, and decided to actually do something useful. So I got connected with the church I started going to. Did a lot of work with the youth group there, the middle schoolers mostly. And, for most of my life, I feel like I was able to fit in everywhere I went.
Yeah.
High school, college, wherever. It just was pretty easy, I thought, to meet new people and make friends and in general be liked, and generally just be heard and appreciated.
Yeah.
But this was a little bit different. I just never felt like I really fit in or broke through any of the walls, and it was just a different experience than I'd ever been used to in the past.
Yeah.
So this church that I went to, they did some really good things. They were a huge part of the community, and they were always trying to find ways to positively impact the entire city or the entire area.
Yeah.
Something happened in our town that made the news, and we just it was tough for everyone, and it was pretty bad event. But this church did a really good job of doing exactly what a church should do during a difficult time.
Yeah.
They were there to just provide support, whether it was emotionally, financially, or any number of ways to people during times of struggle. So
yeah,
I would say in terms of community involvement, they did a great job. And especially with the youth group too, I thought they did a really good job of changing lives. They really wanted to make sure that all the students that got through into the youth group program were connected with mentors and just shown a good example and just had their time occupied by good things.
Yeah, and cultivating relationships with, people they could talk to, it sounds like, and people they could go to if they had, needed advice, who maybe weren't their parents. which is a good thing, I think, for youth groups to do. It's a very important age.
Yeah. And the whole experience of volunteering with the youth group was, for me, very rewarding. It felt like I was, actually making a difference. And I felt like I really got plugged into the church then. And, I felt like I was really part of the church at that moment.
Yeah. So you had those good experiences and good relationships. It sounds like that you built, within like the church and how it related to the community, how you were able to relate to youth. But that wasn't the case for every context or every relationship that you had at that church, right?
Yeah. So being a 20-something-year-old, I didn't want to spend all my time hanging out with middle schoolers as much as they were
as amazing as they are. Yeah.
Right. I wanted to, hang out with people that I was in a similar stage of life with.
Yeah.
So I really tried to get plugged into the young adult ministry. They call it the young adult ministry, but it was mostly just, young adults hanging out.
Right. When you say young adults, that's like post-college, or would it include college students?
We didn't really have a lot of college students because they were off at college.
Right.
So they, when they came back, they would be part of that.
Part of it, but it's not like you were living in a college town. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
okay.
This was a small city.
So it was like young adults, aka people who had just graduated semi-recently, through age.
Probably 30 was probably the cutoff.
30, yeah. Okay.
And even then, you're probably the old guy there. So the young adult ministry, I tried really hard to get plugged in there. I did everything that I thought was the right way to, make friends. And it had worked for most of my life up to that point. But I never really felt like they ever embraced me. And, I was in my early 20s, and maybe I was just dumb. Maybe I was just using tricks that were cool in high school and college, but wasn't cool anymore when you're 22. So I could have just had a warped awareness of where I fit in. But I could tell pretty quickly that this group was not really embracing me. It's not like they were like openly hostile, but they just seemed very good at passively excluding me. It felt like this war of social attrition, and if you ignore this one person enough, maybe they just go away. And the first time I noticed it was maybe just in my first few months of really trying to get connected. And I know a lot of people have probably gone through this, but this was for me like one of the first times it really was apparent to me. So I would get connected and go to a bunch of events and just really try to like volunteer or just be part of things. And I would sometimes introduce myself to the same people like 2 or 3 times before they even had the guts to say like, hey, I remember I met you somewhere, but I forgot your name. And again, I was pretty active. So I felt like, if you had seen me 3 or 4 times, you'd probably know me by then. So I just kind of got used to it. And I even started playing this game where like on my 3rd or 4th encounter with someone, and it was clear they still didn't recognize me. We'd say hi, they'd introduce themselves. And I'd say, oh, good to see you. And, we'd chat for 5 minutes, just small talk. And I would give them no indication that we ever met before. And then right as they leave, I'll say something like, well, it was great to see you again. And by the way, you look really tan. You must have a great time in Cancun last week. Glad to see you enjoyed your vacation, especially since you were so excited about it when you described it to me last week.
Right.
Have a great evening.
Yeah.
And I just loved the look of confusion on their face.
Oh my gosh. They're probably like, who are you? Are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What is happening to me right now? But clearly you were like making an effort to get to know these people, and you knew things about their lives. And so you like had these types of conversations with them before, and they just weren't necessarily, I don't know. Do you feel like it was the group that was there, like they had been friends for a long time? Like that it was sort of an exclusive group, and maybe you were like sort of new, and maybe that was one of the barriers?
There was some of that, but I did see other new people come in and get embraced pretty quickly. So, I mean, I think that being the new guy wasn't necessarily the challenge there. So, I just thought about a bunch of other things, like, is there something wrong with me? Like, for most of my life, everyone seemed to like me, and now they don't. The rest of the world doesn't change that much, so it must be me. Was I not doing something? Was I doing something wrong? Why was I, like, all of a sudden, for lack of a better phrase, not good enough? And why do I not fit in anymore?
Yeah, that sounds like a really frustrating experience. I mean, I've had similar kind of interactions with groups of people as well. And that thing of like, all of these people are reacting to me in the same way, so there must be something wrong with me. Do you feel like you maybe had like some strategies or ways that you kind of tried to diagnose that problem? Because I think you're probably a pretty strategic person.
Very.
Yeah.
My entire life is based on like game theory, basically. So, speaking of theories, I had a bunch of them. I spent basically like a year trying to figure this out. And this is just going to sound so weird, but this is how I approach a lot of problems.
This is how I also approach problems. Like, very strategic, very like, I'm going to figure this out and you're going to like me. I'm going to figure out the magic formula.
Yes, exactly. I'm going to find your weak spot and then you're going to be friends with me.
Right.
So, I like approach this as like this science experiment. Of course, done with like a billion factors, no control, and just purely qualitatively. So not really a good science experiment.
Right.
But like you said, my first thought was maybe I was just the new guy. Maybe if I give it time, I just keep being friendly, just keeping, an approachable, friendly person, empathetic, listen to people, just show them that I care, that that would maybe change, and maybe I'd finally like make friends with these people, or at the very least have someone remember my name.
Which is just like the lowest bar to have someone remember your name.
Yeah, well, set low bars and jump high over them.
Right. Like set it really low and then you're not disappointed, right?
Then you're just, you're crushing it then.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I tried that, but like, so 2 years later, maybe year and a half, I don't know, but people still don't really remember who I am. Like, I would have to repeat my name, what I did for a living, and like cite the last time we spoke, even though like I've literally been serving them at church, or even doing personal favors, like like I would volunteer to drive every time we used a carpool. Like, we'd have each other's phone numbers and be connected on social media, which means so much, of course. And still nothing. So I don't really think time or newness was the primary issue. I also thought maybe was I involved too much? Was I just like becoming background noise? Like, if everyone saw me at every event and I said hi every time, then they may just look at me like, one of those people that just volunteer a lot and are passing out stuff, and what they do and their face, and that's good enough. You're at least, basically familiar with them. So, like, after a little while, I even started to pare back a little bit. And I thought, like, if you don't notice me, then maybe you notice that I'm not there. But that didn't work either. So, like, this got really way too analytical. I overthought this way too much. And I even settled to the fact that, like, maybe people are just really shallow. And this is kind of embarrassing, but I said, like, okay, if they're shallow, then maybe, like, I'll just look good. So, I started dressing up better for church. I hit the gym a lot. And, like, I worked out growing up most of the time, like, throughout my, youth and college, but I, like, really hit the gym at that point. And I still remember this day. There was this one beach trip that a bunch of us went on. And I'm by no means like an A-list actor looking kind of person, but neither was anyone else there. Right. So, I'm like...
You're all just like human beings.
For the most part, I'm within the normal bell curve. But at the same time, I didn't have a hairy gut. Not to say there's anything wrong with it. And, I was, taller than average, I think. So I remember there was this picture that was taken of me and this one other guy. This one other guy is actually one of my good friends there. And one of the few guys that I actually considered like someone that I trusted and someone that knew me well. So both him and I, at that point, we were probably in the best shape of our lives. So I remember this picture was taken right after we got out of the water, and someone's just like, "Hey, say cheese," or whatever they said. And we just got out of the water, and we see the camera, and we're both like pretending like we're not aware of the camera and that we're not flexing as hard as we could.
Yes, this is just a casual picture.
Yeah,
I'm just standing here normally looking cool.
Oh yeah, these arms. Yeah. I was born with these.
Right.
So if I ever like found that photo of me anywhere, I would like untag it so quickly because it was just that embarrassing. I guess posing.
Right.
So that picture though, I think we looked pretty good. And I thought like, all right, now people will remember
They're
me.
going to notice.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, whoever did that photo album later on posted it on Facebook. And of course, I'm not tagged in like 90% of the photos that I'm in. The one with the abs, but like at that moment, I just realized like, look, if like a six pack can't make me memorable, then I don't think vanity is the issue.
Right.
So like I had thought about a lot of these different things.
Yeah, well, and it seems like that it feels like a very human reaction to what you were experiencing. Like, I feel like even if people aren't necessarily conscious of making these sorts of decisions where they're like, oh my gosh, I really want friends and I want to be part of this group, but they are not getting it. So maybe if I'm funnier, maybe if I like accentuate this part of my personality, maybe if I just do nice things for them, maybe if I like change the way I look, then I'm going to like be accepted by this group. I think that's a very like very human response to what you were experiencing. Yeah. But I'm sure that you seem like the type of person who would not have just been like thrown up your hands and been like, well, I guess we'll just never know. So were there some like conclusions that you reached?
Well, what you just described, like literally encapsulated all the strategic plans I had, and they all failed. So there is this one thing that I didn't really consider at first because I didn't want to. And it's this: I'm not part of the dominant like racial group of that church. So being a minority in America means you're always aware of marginalization and how it could be based on race. And then you have to just kind of choose whether or not you give people the benefit of the doubt or not.
Yeah.
I did initially, and I realized, I really wanted to believe that it was something else. But over time, it was harder and harder to rationalize. And I mean, to this day, I still don't know if that was it. But there were some events that, pushed me closer and closer to that conclusion. I don't know if I fully got there, but I do remember the lowest point was one time they needed to do this major outreach event, and they asked me to be part of a montage video. I found out later that they had asked another guy of my same race the day before, but he was too busy to film for them. So they asked me after that. And the whole thing was to create this sense of diversity there, which, was more of an illusion, I thought.
Right, non-existent.
Yeah.
Basically.
Exactly. So as far as I'm concerned, this kind of confirmed some of my suspicions. And, I never wanted to be, like, on some sort of, like, montage video in front of the whole congregation. But I think the thing that upset me the most was that, I was doing a lot of volunteer work and spending a lot of time doing things for the youth group, and they were happy to use me as like a face of diversity there, but didn't want to really mention, like any of the youth group activities I was volunteering with. So, to me, it felt like they were just using me to portray an image or do volunteer work with like, the more difficult kids, or like if they had some fetishistic question about the culture I grew up with, like that's when I was, useful to them. So I guess I kind of realized at that point, or believed at that point, that no matter what I did, I was just kind of, I guess, unsuitable for the people around me. And after like years of observation and even attempting strategy, I kind of came to the assessment that it was something I just didn't really have any control over. And that just was tough to believe. It was tough to accept. And it kind of put me in a resentful place. I mean, at that point, I just thought like, well, forget these people. I don't like them anyways, with a few exceptions. And kind of just accepted that church didn't really welcome me.
Yeah, that's such, I know that stuff happens in churches everywhere, right? And it's not even necessary, it's not exclusive to churches. It's like anytime there's a group of people gathered, there's going to be the chance that there's some sort of outsider that's not being considered, that's not being included, that's not being brought in. And it's just very frustrating. Do you feel like your faith was affected at that time because of that experience? Or do you feel like maybe your faith was kind of like a rock in that time that you were able to point to and say, well, I have this thing, I have this faith, so this stuff is not necessarily going to affect me as much?
Yeah, I think one thing where it helped, my faith that is, where it really helped me was it allowed me to continue working with the youth group and focusing on that and still devoting time to it. Like, I don't think during any of these experiences did I ever say like, well, I'm just going to stop like teaching Sunday school this week and really show them. Like, that was never part of the equation, never even considered it.
Yeah.
I knew that whatever I was experiencing with the other young adults in the group was, kind of distinct, and it was its own, I guess, dimension of my experience with the church. And I still wanted to make sure that I was still productive, I guess, and helping out and just useful for God.
Yeah. What would you say to someone like you, someone who comes to a church and experiences this type of exclusivity? Because I know it happens all over, all the time.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is no church is perfect, and any organization with human beings in leadership, which is all of them, I think, will be imperfect. I was very willing to forgive and tolerate these things that happened to me. When the whole congregation, though, like empowered the wrong people and enabled them to have their bad behavior, that's when I was a little bit resentful of the church as a whole. And, I just felt like that's the type of behavior that pushes out the very people that, you want to bring into church.
Right.
I would also say that you would probably want to at least be a little bit more cognizant that there are people out there like me who are in that position. And as long as you're aware of that and proactively doing something to make people feel more inclusive or make people feel more included, I think you're going to at least start addressing the issue. Like, just know that it is an issue.
Right. Yeah. And I think about this as far as, people tend to congregate or collect themselves in groups that are similar in how they look and how they think and how they feel. but the church is really supposed to be something altogether different, something that's totally countercultural. That's something that's totally goes against what we necessarily instinctively do as humans, but what's actually very good for us and what actually is what we were created to do and experience. And that is to be a group of people that is different, but that cares for each other and that loves each other and that serves each other. And then, because of that can like face outwards and serve the world and serve the community. I know that I'm not innocent in this regard, because I'm also a human being. But just as far as whether this is something that is a culture that can be created from the top down, or if this is something that individual congregants need to own, and just have that infuse the culture of the church, I don't really know which one's better. It probably depends on the church.
Yeah, I would agree that it depends on the church and just the leadership and the people who are there.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know how this would have been, solved. I mean, not that it was, something to be solved, but I don't really know how this would have been any different. I think you could ask each individual person there to like be more friendly and, like talk to the new guy more, but that's obviously not really a easy solution or,
Right. Well, and I think it's also too, thinking about who Jesus paid attention to. And it was always like the people, well, not always, because he talked to, everyone. He talked to the Pharisees. He talked to, the religious leaders as well. But I think that he focused his attention on the people who were falling through the cracks, the people who nobody was listening to and nobody was paying attention to. And I think that that's, a powerful example. And I don't know. I think, too, that everyone has experienced some sort of exclusion in their lives, right? So to kind of talk about it in a way that touches on that, and challenges people to not be that person, So give me one highlight takeaway of something that you learned through this experience. One thing.
Ooh, wow. If there's one thing I would say, it's that if I had not already been a Christian at that time, and I was just there to like explore, like if I had some question about faith or some bad thing that happened to me that, brought me back to the church for 1 week, and I just want to see what this is all about again. And I encountered those people, and they didn't make me feel like I was at all acceptable to them or suitable. I probably would have just walked out. That probably would have confirmed to me that these Christians are no different than anyone else, that because their faith hasn't changed their behavior, that their faith was phony. And I think how many people every single week in America are going to church and have that experience and never go back to church?
Yeah.
How many people do I encounter every Sunday at my church who may be in that situation? So to me, I think the most important thing that I learned was that, look for those people.
Yeah.
You may never have another chance to talk to that person again. And maybe God put them there that day for a reason.
Yeah, and maybe you're the person who is going to reach out and make them feel welcome.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, and however, like uncomfortable it is to talk to somebody new, right? That's maybe how Christ is going to work through you in somebody's life to just reach out and help them know that they're not alone. Well, that's a really great challenge for everyone, I think. I feel like anyone who goes to church regularly could benefit from asking themselves that same question, for sure. So as we wrap up, will you tell me one thing that's hard right now and one thing that's great?
I think the hardest thing for me right now, and this may be skewed because I just got out of work. I like my job. I like what we work on. But sometimes I feel like there's just too much of it, and everything's a priority 1A, which means that anytime you put one thing ahead of another, you're inherently going to fail at 10 other things. And the other challenge I have is I tend to be a very, I guess, like we said, type A person, and I have very high standards for myself. And I know that not everyone is as insane about, getting things done perfectly and critiquing their work as hard. So I think a lot of the struggles I have these days are working with younger employees who may not have had, I guess, the great influences that I've had in my career early on. I had a lot of people who pushed me real hard and showed me what hard work and what a quality product really looked like, and how to really remove your ego and just ask every single question to really probe how good your work is. A lot of the people I work with don't necessarily have that outlook. So
yeah, I think that a lot of people don't have that outlook.
I know. I'm just kind of
that's something that my dad talks about a lot, that you just need to do that extra 5% that nobody else is doing, and that's what's gonna make you exceptional at what you do. So yeah.
So that's just getting used to that's the toughest part, I guess, of my day to day.
Yeah. Well, what's one thing that's great?
Life outside of work is pretty good. I'm in a good CG. I have great friends at church, outside of church. I have strong relationships I had as a child that I still have. I keep in touch with a lot of my good friends. My social schedule, I guess, is good because I can trust the friends I have to first of all actually show up.
Yeah.
I know that's
remember
hard.
your name.
Yeah.
They
they're just easy to hang out with, and we just spend an entire night just watching basketball and talking about completely meandering topics,
right?
And, just hang out.
Yeah.
It's getting warm now, so I like to get outside as much as I can.
Before it gets insanely hot. We're in that nice, happy place between freezing and scorching.
Yeah, I think we get 3 of those a day every year in New York.
Right, exactly. Well, Rob, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Check back next week for a great conversation with Christina Spatero about how difference in relationship builds empathy. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Rob for sharing his story. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson and sound editing is by Andrew Kim. If you have any thoughts or want to engage on this topic further, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Or you can just go to my website, marybsafrit.com. While you're there, feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get an email from me every other Wednesday with an exclusive message and direct access to content and resources I think you'll love. You can also shoot me a message by clicking on the Contact Me button. And you can always head over to Instagram and follow me at maryb.safrit. That's all for now. Check back next week for a brand new episode.